My parents skipped my grandfather's funeral to go on vacation. The service started at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning at Grace Chapel in East Point, Georgia. I sat in the front row between my Aunt Carol and an empty chair, and I held it together for 2 hours because my grandfather had spent my entire life showing me how to hold things together, and I was not going to let the first moment after his death be the moment I failed at it. At 11:07, 7 minutes into the service while his pastor was reading the first scripture, my mother posted a photo to Instagram. She and my father on a resort terrace with drinks in their hands and the ocean behind them and the specific smile of someone who is genuinely happy. The caption said, "Sometimes you have to choose peace. #blessed. #vacation." I did not see it until after the graveside. I was standing in the parking lot of Grace Chapel at 2:43 in the afternoon, unable to make myself get in my car, when my phone lit up. A text from my grandfather's number. It said, "Sweetheart, come to my house right now." I stared at it for a long time. His number, his word for me, the only person in my entire life who has ever called me that. My hands were shaking when I drove to East Point. What I found when I got there is the reason I am telling you this story, and the reason my parents came home from that resort 3 days later to a world that no longer had room for the version of events they had been living inside. If you have ever been the only one who showed up, who sat in the front row while the people who should have been there chose to be somewhere else, this one is for you. Subscribe to Revenge Cold Stories, and now let me take you back to where this story really begins, which is not a parking lot and not a funeral, and not even the morning my grandfather died. It begins with who he was, because without understanding who he was, nothing that follows makes sense. My name is Maya Osei. I am 27 years old. I am a graphic designer in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have been freelancing for 3 years with the specific combination of excitement and financial anxiety that freelancing produces in its early years, the kind where you are building something real but cannot yet see exactly what shape it will take. My grandfather was the first person who told me it would take a shape, not as a comfort, as a statement of observed fact. He said, "You are building something real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He said this 10 days before he died, on a Sunday phone call, while I was telling him about a brand project I was working on that I was nervous about. He asked 3 follow-up questions. The questions were good. He understood the project better after 5 minutes of asking than most people understand it after I have explained it for 30. His name was Joseph Osei. He was 74 years old. He was born in Kumasi, Ghana, and came to Atlanta at 32 with a mechanical engineering degree and $400 and a contact name at a manufacturing firm that turned out to be a dead end. He rebuilt from the dead end. He spent 40 years in industrial maintenance and facility management, retired at 68 as the operations director of a mid-size manufacturing company, and spent the next 6 years in the house on Maple Street in East Point that he had lived in for 31 years. He replaced the roof himself at 63. With his neighbor's help on a ladder because he understood load-bearing structures and because paying someone else to do something you are capable of doing correctly was, to him, a form of dishonesty about your own abilities. He was not expressive in the way people mean when they use that word. He did not say "I love you" easily or frequently. He showed it the way he showed everything, through presence, through showing up, through staying, through the specific quality of attention he gave the people he cared about, which was total and unhurried and made you feel, when he was looking at you, like you were the only thing in his field of vision that mattered. He called me sweetheart from the time I was 3 years old. Nobody else in my family has ever used that word for me. He called me sweetheart at my college graduation and on every Sunday phone call for the 4 years since I moved to Atlanta, and in the last conversation we had 10 days before he died about a design project and 3 follow-up questions and the specific certainty of a 74-year-old man who had watched me for 27 years and had formed a view about what I was capable of. He died on a Tuesday evening. A cardiac event, alone in his house, the way he had lived, without announcement, without asking for help he had not yet needed. His neighbor, Mrs. Addo, found him the next morning when he did not come for their Wednesday coffee. She has a spare key for emergencies. She called the ambulance. Then she called me. She did not call my parents first. Joseph had told her once that if anything happened, she should call Maya first. Mrs. Addo had written this down on a piece of paper and kept it in her kitchen drawer. This is the kind of man he was. He planned for the things that mattered. He wrote them down. He trusted the right people with the pieces of his plan, and he trusted them to hold the pieces correctly until the pieces were needed. I need to tell you about my parents before I tell you what they did, because the blueprint requires understanding before judgment, and because who they are explains how they got there. My mother is Diane Osei. She is 52 years old. She married into the Osei family 29 years ago, which means Joseph was her father-in-law, not her father, and she has always experienced that distinction as permission for a different standard of engagement. She is not a cruel person. She is a person who has spent 29 years organizing her life around her own comfort and has developed across those years an extremely sophisticated set of reasons for why her comfort should take priority, even when it conflicts with someone else's need. She loved Joseph in the way of someone who respected him from a distance and never crossed into the more demanding intimacy of actually knowing him. She found his directness uncomfortable. She found his expectations of presence, the Sunday calls, the holiday appearances, the simple requirement that you show up when showing up is what the moment asks for. Unreasonable, in the specific way of someone who has built a life around not being required to show up. She genuinely believes, I think, that Grandpa would have understood about the resort. The deposits were non-refundable. They had planned this trip for 8 months. He was always so practical. She has told herself this version of events so completely and for so long that she posted the photo at 11:07 without a moment of hesitation, which tells you everything about how thoroughly she had convinced herself. My father is Gerald Osei. He is 54 years old. He is Joseph's son. This is the thing about my father that makes his choice different from my mother's, not in the legal sense, not in any formal accounting, but in the specific moral weight of what he did. He is the man's son. He sat on a resort terrace and raised a glass for a camera while his father was being lowered into the ground 30 minutes away, and he did not book a separate flight. He did not tell my mother, "This is my father. I am going." Gerald's relationship to his own life is built on avoiding the thing that creates conflict with my mother. He has been doing this for 29 years. He called it peace, privately, in the way people name things that allow them to continue doing them. The accumulated cost of this choice, the 29 years of letting Diane decide, of saying nothing while she organized the world to her preferences, is that he did not attend his own father's funeral. He will carry this. Nothing I say or do will make him carry it more than he is already going to carry it. It is simply the permanent fact of what he chose on the day it was his to choose. My Aunt Carol is 49 years old. She is Joseph's daughter, my father's younger sister. She was in the front row beside me at Grace Chapel. She held my hand during the second reading. She is not a hero and not a villain. She is simply someone who showed up, and her showing up is its own statement about the people who did not. The Sunday phone calls started when I was a junior in college, and I was scared in the specific way of someone who has chosen a path that cannot be validated until it produces something, and I did not yet know if it would produce something. He called every Sunday at 3 in the afternoon, which was the time he had decided on, and which he never deviated from, because he believed that reliability was a form of respect for the other person's time. 47 weeks a year he called. He gave himself 5 weeks of flexibility for circumstances and used perhaps 2 of them in 4 years. We talked about everything, his work, his house, my apartment, the mechanical problem he was solving in the workshop that week, the client I was nervous about. He asked questions that required real answers, not social answers. And when I gave him real answers, he gave me real responses, rather than the managed reassurances that most people offer when they do not want to engage with the actual content of what you have said. He told me things, not confessions, information, about what he had built and how, about the specific mistakes he had made, at 32 when he arrived in Atlanta with $400 and a dead-end contact, about what he wished he had known at 27 and what he thought I should know now that he had the perspective of being 74. I wrote things down when we talked. He knew I wrote things down. He approved. He said, "The things worth remembering are worth the 30 seconds it takes to record them." I have 5 notebooks from the past 4 years of Sunday calls. The brass compass has been in my bag since I turned 18. Joseph had carried one his whole working life. Not for navigation. He had explained this to me when I was 9 years old and had asked why he carried it. He said, "I carry it for the principle of it. A compass doesn't care what you want north to be. It just points." He pressed it into my hand and let me hold it and watch the needle find its direction, and then he took it back and put it in his jacket pocket. On my 18th birthday, he gave me a matching one. Same size, same brass, same weight in the palm. He said, "You are old enough now to carry your own." I have carried it since. It is in my bag at the funeral. It is in my bag when I drive to East Point. It is in my bag at every moment of this story because it has been in my bag every day for 9 years, and I am not someone who changes what works. My mother called me 6 days before the funeral, 2 hours after Mrs. Addo called me. I had just gotten off the phone with Carol, who was already making arrangements, and I was sitting at my kitchen table in Atlanta with the particular stillness of someone who has just received the information they were not ready for and has not yet decided what to do next. My mother's voice was soft, the softness of someone who has already made a decision and is presenting it as something that has not yet been made. She said how terrible it was, how much they would miss him, how they were thinking of me. I asked when they were flying in. A pause. Not a long one. She had been expecting the question. She said they were actually in the middle of the resort trip. The deposits were completely non-refundable. She had checked. And honestly, Grandpa would have understood. He was always so practical. He wouldn't want them to lose the money. I said, "Mom, it's his funeral." She said she knew, sweetheart, that being there wouldn't change anything, that he was gone, that they would do something meaningful when they got back, a dinner, a memorial, something. I said, "Okay." I hung up. I called Carol. I cried on Carol's phone for 11 minutes, which is the only time I allowed myself to cry before the service. Then I opened my notebook. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words. Honey, Grandpa would have understood. I did not see the photo until 1:30 in the afternoon at the graveside reception when I checked my phone for the first time since the morning. My mother's Instagram. She and my father on a terrace with the ocean behind them, drinks in hand, the specific full-face smile of someone who is genuinely happy in the moment rather than performing happiness for the camera, posted at 11:07 a.m. The service had started at 11 o'clock. I read the caption twice. Sometimes you have to choose peace, #blessed, #vacation, #family time. I took a screenshot. I put my phone face down on the reception table. I looked at the grave, at Joseph Osei's name on the temporary marker, at the flowers people had brought, at Mrs. Addo standing to the side with her hands folded, the woman who had found him on a Wednesday morning and called me first because he had given her a piece of paper with my name on it. I put my hand in my bag and I found the compass. I held it until the needle steadied. The photo had 47 likes before I put my phone away. At 2:43 p.m., I was standing in the parking lot of Grace Chapel, unable to make myself get in the car when my phone lit up. The contact name read Grandpa Joseph, his number, the number I had been calling every Sunday for 4 years. My thumb recognized it before my mind did. The text said, "Sweetheart, come to my house right now." I stood in the parking lot and read it 4 times. Then I called the number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. His actual voice, the message he had recorded years ago in the specific grammatical formality of a man who learned English as a second language and never once took it for granted. "You've reached Joseph Osei. Please leave your name and your message, and I will call you back." I hung up before the beep. I texted back one word, "Grandpa?" No reply. I got in the car. I drove to East Point. I parked in front of the Craftsman on Maple Street where he had lived for 31 years, and I sat in the car for 2 minutes and looked at the house where every tool was in its place and the fence he had maintained and the oak tree he planted the year my father was born. Mrs. Addo was on the porch. She came down the steps when she saw me. She took my hands. She said he had asked her to send me that text 3 months ago. He had written it out on a piece of paper, word for word, exactly that, and told her to send it from his phone on the day of the funeral in the afternoon, when the worst of the day was over. He had said, "She will come." She held out a key, small, labeled in his handwriting, for Maya. She said, "He said you would know what it opens. He said if you didn't know immediately, look in the workshop." I looked at the key. I looked at the front door of the house. I said, "Did he tell you anything else?" She said, "He said to tell you he was sorry he couldn't be there, but everything he wanted to say is already inside." I walked to the front door. I opened it. The house smelled like cedar and the specific cleaning product he had used for 30 years, and something else, the particular quality of a space that has been entirely inhabited by one person for a very long time, so thoroughly that the absence of the person is itself a presence. On the kitchen table, an envelope, my name in his handwriting. I sat down in the chair beside the table. I opened it. I unfolded the letter inside. He had written it the way he said everything, directly, without preamble, as if he had been waiting to say this and saw no reason to delay. The letter was 2 pages. His handwriting filled both sides in the compressed, precise script I had been reading since I was old enough to receive mail. The handwriting of someone who had decided early that legibility was a form of respect for the person reading. He began the way he began everything, directly. He said he had known for approximately 18 months that his heart was not reliable. He had received this information from his cardiologist and had made a decision, which he explained plainly, he did not want to tell anyone, including me, because he had watched people receive this kind of news about a parent or grandparent, and he had watched what it did to the remaining time. It turned it into grief management. People stopped being present with the person and started processing their own anticipatory loss in front of them, which he found, he used the word undignified, not for the grievers, but for the situation, and which he had decided he did not want for his last months. He said, "You were simply with me. Every Sunday at 3. Every Saturday you drove 40 minutes for no reason except that you wanted to sit in the workshop while I fixed something and talk. You did not know you were saying goodbye, and so you did not say goodbye, Wes. You just came and stayed and asked questions, and that is exactly what I wanted the end of my life to look like." I read this sentence 3 times before I moved to the next paragraph. He said he wanted to tell me some things about my parents before I found what was in the workshop, because the context mattered, and he did not want me to encounter the documents without it. He did not say my parents were bad people. He said they were people who prioritized their own comfort, which was a fact and not a judgment, and that facts about people's character, stated plainly, were more useful than judgments about their character because judgments invited argument and facts invited assessment. He said he had been assessing my parents for 29 years. He said the assessment was complete. He said, "I do not want you to spend your life waiting for them to become something they are not. This is the most expensive thing a person can do with their time. I want you to see them clearly and then decide, from clarity rather than from hope, how much of yourself you give to the relationship." He said, "The documents in the workshop will tell you the rest." He said, "I love you, Maya. I have loved you since the day you were born, and I have never once stopped." This letter is the version of that sentence that I could not always say out loud. The last line, "Go to the workshop. Everything is on the workbench." I sat at the kitchen table for 5 minutes after I finished the letter. Not processing. I was past the point where processing was a useful description of what was happening. I was simply sitting with the specific quality of holding a letter from someone who is gone, in their handwriting, in their voice, in the particular rhythms of a mind you have known your whole life. The letter was him, completely, recognizably, undeniably him. I folded it, I put it in my bag beside the compass. Then I went downstairs to the workshop. The workshop smelled exactly as it always had, cedar and machine oil, and the mineral undertone of old tools that have been used and maintained for decades. The pegboard was intact, every tool in its labeled position, the system he had built across 40 years of adding to it and refining it, the organization so complete that you could close your eyes and reach for a specific tool and find it in the correct location. I had spent summers in this workshop from the time I was 6 years old. I knew where every tool lived. I knew which drawer held the spare drill bits and which shelf had the sandpaper organized by grit. I knew the specific squeak of the third step on the basement stairs and the way the workshop light flickered once when you first turned it on before settling into its full brightness. On the workbench, a metal lockbox, the size of a shoebox, gray, with a combination of scratches that told me it had been in use for years, and a lock that matched the small brass key Mrs. Addo had pressed into my hand. A note was taped to the top, 4 words in his handwriting: "The key Mrs. Addo gave you." I used the key. The lock released cleanly. I opened the box. The first document was the deed to the house on Maple Street. I recognized what it was before I finished reading the header. I have enough experience with property documents from design work for real estate clients to recognize the format. I read it fully, carefully, the way he had always told me to read things that mattered. My name was on it, not as a future beneficiary, not as a remainder interest in a life estate structure. As a current co-owner, added to the title 2 years ago in a transaction that had been properly recorded with Fulton County. I had been a co-owner of this house for 2 years. I had not known this. My parents did not know this. The house on Maple Street, the Craftsman where he had lived for 31 years, where I had spent summers and Saturdays and 9 years of Sunday phone calls. I had owned a portion of it for 2 years and had driven past it and into its driveway and through its front door without knowing. I set the deed on the workbench. I picked up the next document, a savings account passbook. The physical kind, old-fashioned, the kind that has been largely replaced by digital statements, but that Joseph had maintained because he believed in making numbers visible and tangible and real. The account was in my name. I opened it to the transaction history. Deposits going back 9 years. Every month, without exception, $300. The first deposit was dated the month I started college. The most recent was dated 11 days before he died. 108 deposits, $300 each. I did not do the full arithmetic immediately. I did it in my head, approximately, and then I had to put the passbook down and look at the pegboard for a moment because the approximate number was enough to make the room feel different. He had deposited $300 into an account in my name every single month for 9 years and had never mentioned it. Not once. Not a hint, not a reference, not a suggestion that something was being built on my behalf. Every Sunday call, every Saturday workshop visit, every 10-day before he died conversation about a design project and 3 follow-up questions. He had been depositing into this account the week of every one of those conversations and had said nothing about it. I looked at the total with interest, $34,200. I set the passbook beside the deed on the workbench. The third document was the will, handwritten, 2 pages, signed and dated 14 months before his death. The witnesses were Mrs. Addo and her husband, both signatures present and dated. The notary's stamp was clear and specific. The notary's name, license number, commission expiration date, all of it exactly correct because he had been an operations director for 40 years and understood that the details determined whether a thing held. He left the remainder of his estate, the personal property, the workshop tools, the investment account, entirely to me. The investment account balance was noted as approximately $18,000 at the time of drafting, subject to market adjustments. Aunt Carol was named as executor. An attorney's business card was clipped to the will. James Osei, Estate and Probate Law, East Point, Georgia. No relation, as the card's address and the different first name made clear. A note in my grandfather's handwriting on the card. He has everything. Call him. I read the will fully, from the first line to the last witness signature. The The way you read a document when the document matters and skimming it would be a failure of respect for what it contains. Then I looked at what remained in the box, a smaller sealed envelope. My name on the front in his handwriting. Below my name, also in his handwriting, open last. I set it aside. I looked at what else was in the box first. A folder containing what appeared to be supporting documentation for the estate. Bank statements, the recorded deed transfer confirmation from the county, correspondence with James Osai's office, dated across a 2-year period. I paged through the folder without reading every document. I was not ready to read every document yet. I was building the picture in pieces, the way you build a structural assessment. Overall shape first, then detail. The overall shape was this. Joseph Osai had spent the last 2 years of his life, at minimum, quietly constructing a legal and financial structure specifically designed to ensure that what he had built went where he intended it to go, regardless of what anyone else in his family might prefer. He had done it without telling me, without asking for my participation or my awareness. He had simply built it and left it in a lockbox in the workshop in the basement of the house on Maple Street and trusted that I would come and find it. He had trusted a 70-year-old neighbor to send a text from a dead man's phone because he knew she would do it correctly and he knew I would come. He had been right about both. I picked up the small sealed envelope. I opened it. Inside, a single index card. His handwriting on one side, in the compressed, precise script I'd been reading my whole life. It said, "A compass doesn't care what you want north to be. It just points. You have always pointed true, Maya. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Below that, a dash and his name. Just his name. I held the index card in the workshop that smelled like him, and I sat on the stool I had been sitting on since I was 6 years old, and I cried in the way that the workshop made possible, completely, without management, without the awareness of other people that had kept me measured and controlled all day. Not in the pew at Grace Chapel, not at the graveside, not in the parking lot with the compass in my palm. Here, in the place that was most entirely him, with the deed and the passbook and the will on the workbench and the index card in my hands, I finally stopped holding it together. I cried for a long time. Then I stopped. I wiped my face. I put the index card in my bag with the letter and the compass. I looked at the workbench. I picked up my phone and called James Osai. He answered on the second ring. I introduced myself. He said he had been expecting my call. He said my grandfather had told him I would call on the day of the funeral because I was punctual. He said this with a warmth that told me he had liked Joseph, not just worked for him, and that he had kept the afternoon clear. I asked him to confirm what I was looking at. He did. The deed transfer had been properly recorded with Fulton County 2 years ago. The savings account was fully in my name. The will was clean, properly executed, witnessed and notarized according to Georgia requirements. There was nothing to contest and no one with legal standing to contest it. To challenge the will, a party would need to establish that Joseph had lacked testamentary capacity or had been subject to undue influence at the time of execution. And given that the will had been drafted with full documentation of his reasoning and that James had detailed notes from their meetings 14 months ago demonstrating Joseph's complete clarity of mind, he would be very comfortable defending it. I asked about my parents specifically. He was careful, professional, accurate. They were not named in the will. They had no claim on the house, the savings account, or the personal property. The deed transfer to me had been made as a gift during his lifetime and was complete and recorded. It was not a testamentary transfer and was not subject to probate. I said, "He built this so it couldn't be undone." James said, that was his specific instruction to me. He said he wanted everything done in a way that was legally irreversible before he died, so that the outcome would not depend on any proceeding he could no longer be present for. He was very clear about that. I thanked him. We agreed to meet later in the week for the formal estate review. I hung up. I called Carol next. She answered immediately. She had been waiting since I'd called her from the workshop 20 minutes earlier to tell her I had found the box. I told her what was in it, the deed, the savings account, the will, the index card. I told her James Osei's name and that she was named as executor. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said she had known there was a plan. Joseph had asked her to be executor 6 months ago and had told her only what she needed to know to fulfill the role. That there was a will, that Maya was the beneficiary, that James Osei had the documents, and that when the time came, she should support Maya in whatever she needed to do next. He had not told her the specifics. He had said, "Maya will find everything. She will know what to do." I said, "He told you I would know what to do." She said, "He said it like it wasn't a question." We were both quiet for a moment. She said he had talked about me every time she saw him. The design work, the Sunday calls, the way I asked follow-up questions. She said he had told her once, "Maya is the only one who asks what I mean after I say something. Everyone else accepts the surface. She goes underneath." I looked at the passbook on the workbench. $300 a month for 9 years. I said, 300 times 108 months. Carol said, "What?" I said, "He deposited $300 into an account in my name every month for 9 years and never said a word about it." She was quiet. Then, "That sounds exactly like him." It did. It sounded exactly like him in the way that the index card sounded exactly like him, and the letter sounded exactly like him, and the way the workshop organized itself around his logic sounded exactly like him. He was everywhere in this house, and he had been everywhere in this house for 31 years. And the being everywhere was not going to stop simply because the cardiac event had happened on a Tuesday evening. I went upstairs and knocked on Mrs. Addo's front door. She was on the porch. She had been on the porch since I went inside, which I understood when I saw her was not anxious waiting, but purposeful waiting. She had been asked to be available. She was available. I sat with her on the porch steps and I told her what was in the box. Not all of it, and the deed and the account and the will, enough for her to understand the shape of what he had built. She nodded slowly through all of it in the way of someone who is not surprised but is moved. I asked about the text, about how far back he had planned it. She said he had brought a piece of paper to her kitchen table 3 months before he died, and sat down and told her what he needed from her. She had written out his instructions on the paper herself so she would have them correctly. He had said to send the text from his phone. He had shown her how to access his phone for this specific purpose and had walked her through it twice to make sure she could do it. He had said to send it in the afternoon on the day of the funeral, when the worst of the day was over, and to be on the porch when she arrived. He had said, "She will come as soon as she reads it. She will come because sweetheart is what I call her, and she will know." I said, "He planned this 3 months ago." She said, "He planned this the day he got the news about his heart, 18 months ago. He just took 3 months to get all the pieces in place and another 15 months to make sure the pieces were right." She reached over and took my hand. She said, "He came for Wednesday coffee 2 weeks before he died. We sat at my kitchen table and he drank his coffee and we talked about the garden and about the fence on his south side that needed attention. And when he left, he stopped at my door and he said, 'Dorcas, you have been a good neighbor for 20 years. I am grateful for it. And I have one more thing to ask.' She said she had told him she would do whatever he needed. He had said, 'When Maya comes, make sure she knows I knew, that I always knew who she was.' I looked at the yard, the garden he had maintained, the fence his son had not helped him repair, the oak tree that had been growing in that yard since before I was born. I said, 'He always knew, didn't he?' She said, 'He knew everything about the people he loved. He just didn't always say it out loud. He showed it by what he did when nobody was watching.' $300 every month, 9 years. Nobody was watching. I went back to the kitchen. I made tea from the cabinet where he had kept the same tea for 30 years. The same brand, the same position on the shelf, the kind of consistency that is itself a form of honesty about who you are and what you value. I sat in his chair. I had never sat in his chair before. He was always in it when I was here, and I was always in the one beside it. Sitting in it now was the specific disorientation of inhabiting a space that has always been someone else's. I sat there and I drank the tea and I thought about what he had said in the letter. Spend your energy on what can be changed. The things that can't be changed are already done. Your job now is to decide what you build next. He had been building for 18 months, 2 years for the deed, 9 years for the savings account, a lifetime for everything else. My parents were at a resort, he was at his workbench, even in the months when he was managing a heart that was not reliable, in the months when most people would be occupied entirely with their own situation, he had been at his workbench, building something for me. I thought about the index card, the compass that doesn't care what you want north to be. I took the compass out of my bag and set it on the kitchen table. The needle found north. It always finds north. I took out my notebook, I opened it to a fresh page, I wrote the date and the time, and I started writing everything I needed to do next, not emotionally, methodically, the way he would have done it. I wrote James Osei's name and a note to schedule the formal estate meeting. I wrote Carol's name and a note about the executor process. I wrote a note to myself about the deed and what it meant for the house and what I wanted to do about the house. And at the bottom of the page, in the margin, I wrote $300 times 108 months, not for the arithmetic, as a reminder of what quiet attention produces over 9 years when nobody is watching and nobody is announcing it and the person doing it simply shows up every month without fail because the person on the other end of the account is worth showing up for. I stayed in the house for 2 more hours. I was not ready to leave yet. The house on Maple Street, which I had not known for 2 years was also my house, had the specific quality of a place that was going to take more than one afternoon to understand fully. I would come back. I already knew I would come back. Before I left, I went back to the workshop one more time. I stood in the middle of it and looked at the pegboard and the workbench and the stool and the particular light that came through the single basement window at this hour. I said out loud, to the workshop, to the cedar smell, to the 40 years of organized tools, I said, I know, I heard you, I'll come back. I turned off the light, I went upstairs, I locked the front door behind me, I drove back to Atlanta in the dark. My parents came home on a Tuesday, 3 days after the funeral, 3 days after the parking lot and the text from a dead man's phone, and the workshop and the index card, and the tea in his chair. 3 days during which I had met with James Osei at his office in East Point, reviewed the estate documents formally, and begun the process of understanding, in legal and financial terms, exactly what my grandfather had built. James had a folder for me, not a thin folder, the kind of folder that communicates sustained professional engagement over a long period of time. He had been working with Joseph for 2 years. He knew the structure of every document, the reasoning behind every decision, the specific sequence in which my grandfather had wanted things executed. He walked me through it methodically. The deed transfer, completed and recorded. The savings account fully established in my name with me as sole account holder. The will, which would enter probate with Carol as executor, a process James estimated would take 4 to 6 months for an estate of this complexity. The investment account, which had grown to approximately $19,000 since the will was drafted. He told me one thing that was not in the documents. He said Joseph had come to his office for their final meeting 8 months before he died. He had reviewed every document one last time, made 2 small adjustments to the will's language that he wanted to be more precise, and then sat back in the chair across from James's desk and said he was satisfied. He had said, I want to make sure that when I am gone, the people who showed up know that I knew they showed up. The documents are how I can still say that after I cannot say anything anymore. James told me this without editorializing. He delivered it the way my grandfather would have wanted it delivered, as information, plainly stated, accurate. I wrote it in my notebook before I left his office. Carol and I met on Monday, the day before my parents returned. We met at the house on Maple Street because Carol had suggested it and because it felt correct. The executor meeting with the beneficiary in the estate property, which was also simply a niece and an aunt sitting at a kitchen table in a dead man's house, trying to understand what the next steps looked like. She brought coffee from the shop 2 blocks away that Joseph had gone to every Saturday morning for 15 years. The specific coffee, the specific shop. She had done it without discussing it with me, and I recognized the gesture for what it was, the particular way people honor someone by doing the small thing that was theirs. We went through the executor process. James had already briefed Carol separately, and she came to the meeting organized, with her own notes, the efficiency of someone who has been told she is trusted with something important and has decided to be worthy of the trust. She told me the things she had not told me on the phone the day of the funeral, the fuller version of her conversations with Joseph in the months before he died. He had called her in January, 7 months before his death, and told her he needed an executor he could trust and that he wanted it to be her. He had explained the general structure of what he was planning without giving her the specifics because he wanted the specifics to reach me directly, in his voice, through the letter and the documents. He had said to her, "Carol, if Diane and Gerald behave the way I expect them to behave, Maya is going to need someone on her side from the first day. I need you to be that person." Carol said, I asked him what he expected them to do. She looked at her coffee. She said, he didn't answer. He just said, "You'll know when you see it." She had seen it. 11:07 a.m. The Resort Terrace, #blessed. We did not spend a long time discussing my parents. There was not much to discuss that the facts did not already cover. What we spent time on was the estate process, timelines, the probate filing Carol had already initiated with James's office, the logistics of the personal property in the house, and what I wanted to do with it. I said I wanted to keep the house. I had been thinking about this since the workshop stool on Saturday afternoon, and I had arrived at the answer without difficulty because the answer was obvious, and had probably been obvious before I knew to ask the question. Carol nodded like this was what she had expected me to say. She said, "He thought you'd say that." My parents called Tuesday evening 2 hours after their flight landed. A joint call. I could hear the speakerphone quality of it, the slight audio distance that means two people are sitting together with a phone between them. Diane led. Gerald was present but quiet in the way he was always quiet when Diane had organized the approach. The call was warm in the way my mother's difficult calls were always warm, the warmth deployed as a management strategy, a way of establishing tone before content. She said they were home. She said they had been thinking about me the whole time. She said they wanted to see me. I said, "Can you come to East Point tomorrow morning?" A pause. She had been expecting something else. A longer conversation, a negotiation, the managed back and forth that our difficult conversations usually involved. She said, "To Grandpa's house?" I said, "Yes, 10 o'clock. She said they would be there. I arrived at 9. I made coffee, the same brand from the same cabinet, the same way he made it. I set 2 cups on the kitchen table and put the lockbox on the counter, closed, and sat down in my chair. Not Joseph's chair, the one beside it. I was not ready to receive them from his chair. The box I had laid out nothing from. I had considered it, considered whether to have the deed and the passbook and the will arranged on the table like a presentation, the documents doing the work of the conversation before the conversation began. I decided against it. He had said, "Let the documents speak." He had not said, "Perform the documents." There was a difference, and it mattered. They arrived at 10:02, my mother first, then my father behind her, the standard order of their entrance into situations she has organized. Diane looked around the house with the assessment quality she brought to spaces she expected to have opinions about. Gerald looked at the kitchen and then at his father's chair and then at the floor, which is where he looked for most of what followed. I poured coffee. I sat down. I waited until they were seated. Then I said I was going to tell them some things and let them respond however they wanted to respond. I told them about the deed, that I had been a co-owner of this house for 2 years, that the transfer had been properly recorded with the county, that the house would pass fully to me through the estate process. I told them about the savings account, $34,200 plus interest, 9 years of $300 a month, an account in my name that my grandfather had opened the month I started college and had funded every single month without exception or announcement. I told them about the will, that I was the sole beneficiary of the remaining estate, that Carol was executor, that James Osie's office had already filed the initial probate documentation. I did not tell them what the index card said. That was mine. The room was very quiet while I said these things. Not dramatically quiet, the quiet of a space in which two people are receiving information that requires recalibration of a picture they have been holding. Diane's face did what it does when something she has not anticipated arrives. A moment of visible reorganization, quickly managed, the specific expression of someone who is already deciding how to respond before they have finished processing what they have heard. She said, "We didn't know any of this." I said, "I know. Neither did I until the day of the funeral." She said he should have told the family. I said, "It was his estate. He told who he wanted to tell." A pause. She said, "This doesn't seem fair, Maya." I looked at my mother. I had been thinking about what I would say to her since Saturday afternoon, and I had arrived at one sentence, and I had decided that one sentence was enough. Not a speech, not a list of everything she had done and not done. One sentence delivered the way Joseph delivered difficult things. Flat, specific, without heat. I said, "You posted a photo at 11:07. His service started at 11. The room went completely still. Not the managed stillness of two people composing their responses. The involuntary stillness of a true thing landing. Gerald made a sound. I had been watching him for the past 10 minutes, watching him not look at his father's chair, watching him hold his coffee cup without drinking from it, watching the specific quality of a man who is sitting inside a consequence he cannot calculate his way out of. The sound he made was not a word. It was the sound of someone who knows something and has no answer for it, the specific acoustic of a man putting his hand over his eyes. He put his hand over his eyes. He did not apologize. Not in that moment, not in the complete sentence that an apology requires. He was not yet capable of the full sentence. He made the sound and covered his eyes, and that was what Gerald could produce on a Tuesday morning in his dead father's kitchen, sitting in front of the daughter who had been in the front row. I waited. Then I said, "I'm not asking you to explain it. I wanted you to know what he built while you weren't looking." I stood up. I picked up my bag. I said James Osie's office would be in touch through Carol as the estate process moved forward, and that any questions about the estate should go through James. I walked them to the front door. I opened it. I held it. They went through it. My mother turned in the doorway. She was going to say something. I could see the sentence forming, the management instinct assembling a response to the situation. She looked at my face, and whatever she saw there stopped the sentence. She went through the door. I closed it. I locked it. I was in my grandfather's house, which was also my house, on a Tuesday morning in late spring, with the light coming through the kitchen window at the angle it always came through at this hour, and the coffee was still hot in the pot, and the chair beside the table, his chair, was empty. I went back to the kitchen. I sat in his chair for the first time. I let myself sit in it and feel the specific weight of it, the worn arms, the slight lean that came from 30 years of the same person sitting in the same position. I poured more coffee. I looked out at the yard. What came after was not dramatic, and I'm going to tell you about it the way he would have told it. Plainly, specifically, one thing at a time. Diane called twice in the first week. Both calls were versions of the same conversation, attempting to reopen the estate question, asking whether I had considered what Grandpa would have wanted for the whole family, using phrases like, "We could work something out, and surely he didn't mean to exclude us entirely." I let both calls go to voicemail. I listened to them. I did not delete them because I had learned from him that documentation is not paranoia, it is preparation. In the 3rd week, she stopped calling about the estate. In the 6th week, she called on a Sunday afternoon, the 3 o'clock slot, his slot, which I do not think she chose intentionally, but which landed with the weight of an unintentional choice anyway. She said only, "I miss him." I said, "I know. Me too." The call lasted 4 minutes. It was the most honest 4 minutes we had ever had. Gerald called on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after the kitchen table meeting. He had clearly been preparing the call for 2 weeks. The quality of it was the quality of a sentence someone has been building slowly, testing the structure of it, making sure it will hold what it needs to hold before they say it out loud. He said, "I should have been there. There is nothing I can say about it. I needed you to know that I know." I said, "Okay, Dad. Not forgiveness, not absolution." Acknowledgement that he had said the true thing, which was the first true thing he had said to me in a very long time, and that I had heard it. I give him time. He is going to have to decide what he does with the knowing. That is his work, not mine. The Instagram post is still up. Diane never deleted it. I have noticed this without comment. It exists, time-stamped at 11:07 a.m. on the morning of Joseph Osei's funeral, and it is its own permanent record of a choice made on a specific day. Some things document themselves. Carol serves as executor with the efficiency and care of someone who was trusted with something important and has decided to be worthy of the trust. We meet weekly while the estate processes. She told me in the third week that Joseph had said something to her at Christmas last year that she had been waiting for the right moment to pass on. He had said, "Carol, Maya is going to be fine. She is the kind of person who is fine no matter what you hand her." But just in case, I am making sure she has something to start with. I wrote it in the notebook. I photographed the page. Mrs. Addo and I have Wednesday coffee. Not in her kitchen. In his kitchen, which is also my kitchen now, in the same time slot he kept for 30 years, with the same coffee from the same shop 2 blocks away. We do not always talk about him. Sometimes we sit with the Wednesday morning the way he sat with it, fully, without rushing it towards something else. She brought her own cup the third week. She has her own hook on the mug rack now, which she hung herself when I wasn't looking, and which I noticed on a Thursday when I came to check on the garden. I left it there. The savings account, $34,200. I did not touch it for 3 months. I let it sit while I decided what it meant to use it, what he would have wanted it to do. He had not left instructions about the money. He had left the money. The decision about what to do with it was mine, which I understood to be intentional. He was not managing from beyond the grave. He was giving me a start and letting me decide what the start produced. I used $8,000 on the design equipment upgrade I had been putting off for 2 years. The specific upgrade, a new monitor, better rendering software, a drawing tablet that I had priced and deferred and priced again across 24 months of telling myself it was not quite the right time. I bought it without guilt. This is the thing I want to say precisely about that purchase. I bought it without guilt, which does not sound like a significant thing, but which was for me at that point in my life genuinely significant. He had deposited $300 a month for 9 years so that I could use the money without guilt when the moment came. The moment came, I used it. I took on 2 new clients in the month after the estate settled. I was different in the negotiations than I had been before, not harder, not more aggressive, steadier. The word that fits is steadier. I knew something I had not known before March, which is that someone had been watching me build for 9 years and had decided, month by month and deposit by deposit, that what I was building was worth $300 a month of his pension. That knowledge is not something you put down. The back fence needed work. Joseph had noted it in one of his workshop journals. Dated 8 months before his death, a note that said, "South Fence, 3rd and 4th posts, address in spring." He had not made it to spring. I addressed it in July. I used his tools. The level, the post hole digger, the specific clamps from their labeled hooks on the pegboard. Arthur Beale, his old colleague from the manufacturing company who had visited the house twice since the funeral to check on things, who I had called because his number was in Joseph's address book under A, listed simply as Arthur, reliable, came on a Saturday and helped. We worked through the morning. He told me things about Joseph that I had not known, small things, work things, the specific ways a man's character shows up in professional situations when he is not performing for family. He said Joseph had been the most trusted person in any room he occupied for 40 years. He said people brought their problems to Joseph, not because he always had solutions, but because he listened to the full problem before he said anything. He said, "He talked about you constantly. From the time you were in college, he'd bring in something you designed and show people. He wasn't sentimental about it. He'd just say, My granddaughter made this. Look at the structure of it. I set the last post. I checked it with the level. The bubble centered. Arthur looked at it. He said, "That's exactly level." I said, "I know. I checked it twice." He laughed. He said, "That's him. That's exactly him. The compass is on the kitchen table when I come on weekends, not my apartment desk. The kitchen table in the house on Maple Street where I work on Saturday mornings with the light coming through the window at the angle that has not changed in 31 years. The needle points north. It has always pointed north. It will keep pointing north regardless of what anyone in my family has decided they want north to be. The fence is straight in the yard. The tools are in their places on the pegboard. Mrs. Addo's cup is on its hook. The first deposit from 9 years ago, $300 August, the month I started college, is in the account history of a savings account with my name on it that I'm still not entirely used to having. The oak tree he planted the year my father was born is still growing in the yard. It does not know what happened at the resort. It does not know about the 1107 photo, or the non-refundable deposits, or the empty chair in the front row of Grace Chapel. It just grows, the way it has been growing for 54 years, because it was planted correctly and watered consistently and given the specific conditions it needed to become what it is. My grandfather understood this about trees and about people. You give them what they need consistently, without announcement. You do not require them to express gratitude for the watering. You just show up and water and watch what grows. He showed up for 9 years without announcement. I am trying to learn to do the same. Tell me your first name and your city in the comments. Tell me if someone loved you quietly, if someone built something for you without telling you, showed up without announcing it, watered something in you without requiring credit. Tell me if you knew or if you only understood it after. Share this with someone who needs to hear tonight that the quiet ones are paying attention, that the people who build without announcement leave the most permanent things behind. Subscribe to Revenge Cold Stories. I'll see you in the next one.